lot of AI headlines, and California has put a hard stop on an AI safety bill. Governor Gavin Newsom reportedly vetoed the legislation, noting that the measure would apply overly strict standards on even basic functions, while not factoring in high-risk situations. So those are the arguments. Okay, now for more insight into all of this, let's bring in Patrick Perkins. Patrick is an associate professor of law at Kansas University. Patrick, great to see you. Thanks for taking time to chat with us.
Wonderful to be here. Thank you.
Okay, California's governor, as we talked about, recently incurred the wrath of AI safety advocates, as well as powerful leaders in Hollywood when he vetoed this measure designed to provide safety and security as artificial intelligence really ramps up. So what were the goals of this measure, and why did the California governor veto this?
Yeah, the goals were essentially to start building some guardrails around AI. It's been a discussion point for a while now. We don't know what's going to happen with it. This is the first step in the conversation to say, how should we start regulating this within the United States? Other countries have already done steps for it. The main aspects of this bill were, one, that any company that took $100 million or more in order to ramp up their AI system would be subject to the regulations within this bill. And those regulations specifically, one, would require it to have a kill switch in place so that the creators at any point could essentially switch that program off in case there were signs of danger. And two, that it required to have third-party audits, essentially, safety checks of the code of the system to make sure that, or to at least check to see if there's any obvious problems therein.
Yeah.
Now,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say the reasons why Governor Newsom vetoed it, well, the ones that he stated at least, there were 5 of them. In general, he said it would create a false sense of security overall, that this didn't go far enough and would make people feel safe when they shouldn't, essentially. It said it lacked nuance. It broadly applied to all areas of AI, even though some are clearly more dangerous than others. It was overly broad in that sense. It was also overly broad. It only applied to these large companies, when smaller companies often are more dangerous in their applications. And then the other most important point, he said there just wasn't enough empirical research and data at this point to back up this bill, and he wanted more of that. An important point isn't that Governor Newsom was saying he didn't see the need for the bill. He's on board with AI regulation. He just didn't think that this was the way to go about doing it.
Okay, so what has the reaction been from the tech industry? And if this legislation would have gone through, how would it have impacted the sector?
Unsurprisingly, tech companies are in favor of the veto of it, by and large. OpenAI, Google, Meta were the 3 big names who are critics of it. By and large, companies do not like being regulated by the government. That said, there really wasn't anything in this bill that all of these large players in the sector haven't already committed that they would already do this as is. So theoretically speaking, it wouldn't change anything. But then, of course, we're just relying on the good graces of the AI companies to police themselves rather than having some sort of government oversight.
Okay, so to pick up on that point, California lawmakers who champion this measure are clearly voicing their disappointment, no surprise there. And they say voluntary industry commitments, basically asking the AI industry to police itself, it doesn't work. So what are the potential risks of not having clear regulations in place for AI?
All we have to do is look at the rest of the tech industry to see how that works out. We don't have any federal privacy policies within place in the United States. It leads to essentially chaos across the country as to state regulations for privacy and data considerations, whether or not those apply across state borders, and whether or not companies have to abide by them, period. You look at social media, where it's essentially still the wild, wild west of what companies can and can't do, and just look at the elections and misinformation, and you can see some of the negative consequences that come over the lack of any sort of regulation. AI has the potential to be a lot more dangerous than any of those things.
Absolutely, right. And I think that's a good point, because virtually every country says AI needs to develop in a controlled, safe fashion. So what alternatives, if any, are floating around out there to counter this measure that California has buried?
Well, first off, to note again, Governor Newsom, what he said is that he was establishing a committee. He already appointed Lee Fei. She's a professor at Stanford, often considered the godmother of AI, to head this up, to come up with some alternatives. One possibility is what the EU is already in the process of doing,
Hmm.
is to really start regulating on a critical danger level basis. So that sort of those sorts of AI that's touching on more high risk matters would be regulated at some level. Just think of things such as infrastructure, nuclear weapons, the things that would really cripple society if something went wrong. Whereas our typical day-to-day AI that we use in maybe in researching or in chat functions on the computer, that would have less stringent regulations. That said, there's no consensus right now over what we should do. It's still in the feeling out process. As Scott Wiener, the senator from California who sponsors this bill, said earlier, that essentially this is just the beginning of a conversation. This isn't dead. This is the launching off point. And I don't think anybody has a clear view where this is going to end up in the long run.
Yeah, but that representative was very frustrated with the way this went down. So now
Yes.
the question is,
Yes.
will other states follow California's lead? How might this veto influence AI regulations in other states or even internationally?
Yeah, there are some other states that have already passed some sort of regulations, such as Utah. Just very low levels, though. But the fact of the matter is, the majority of AI companies are based in California. As California goes, so goes the rest of the nation, and really, as so goes the rest of the world in a lot of ways. You know, at the same time that we want to regulate AI, there are very real questions about stifling innovation, especially as this is a proverbial arms race globally. You know, the United States does clearly want to put in place good regulations, but at the same time, there are other major players out there,
Yeah.
the usual suspects, who are still doing this as well. It's finding that right balancing act. Personally, I think we need a lot of global cooperation on this, but I think the chances of that realistically happening are pretty slim.